you know, a good portion of my day is professional development. However, I do it for the ELA teachers. This year on our superintendent's conference day, we presented to everyone, and the focus was on our content area teachers. Yeah. So it was half a day on superintendent's conference day. I don't know what's going to come in the future. I think we will have to be more, you know, some more about what their needs are. It'll evolve.
I'm not required to do professional development formally, so mine is more on an as-needed basis. If a teacher comes to me and said, you know, Erin, can you help me with this? Sure, this is, you know, here's a suggestion, this is what I would try, and stuff like that. But other than, like I said, the occasional presentation at a superintendent's day or a faculty meeting, it's not really part of my role, so it's not something that I'm doing on a regular basis.
And mine's the same way. Mine's on an as-needed basis. They come to me and they have questions on a student or how to present a certain thing, or if there's something in the Common Core that they, science teachers are told, this is in our Common Core, you know, I have no idea what this means. But, you know, what is this course reading garbage? But that's the only professional development that I do. I haven't done a superintendent's conference day in about 5 years now.
They're so much fun.
Okay.
I'll say, how much then, when you're working with content area teachers, do you help them in selecting texts that would be possibly more accessible to readers of different levels in their content area classroom, including students who struggle or students whose native language is not English? Do you do any of that?
With the new Common Core and the new standards coming down, most of the departments had to buy new textbooks. I was heavily involved in the selection of the textbooks. They wanted to do all the lexile levels. Is there differentiation in them? Can you look at this for me? Can you do this? Which was interesting, but all I did was turn around and call the publisher and ask them the same questions. And I told them to do the same thing. I would ask the publisher, and then I would just take it back to them, because all that information is out there. You don't have to find it yourself, especially with science and math textbooks. It's hard to level those and lexile. Publishers have that information. That's pretty much all I've done. Sometimes if they're bringing in outside information, they'll ask me to level it, see what reading level it's at, and if I can lower the level, what would I need to do to lower the level? That's about all I do.
As part of the English department, I help choose different novels, textbooks, things that they're going to use in the department. I've had teachers come to me individually and say, I want to use this book. Do you think my struggling readers are going to be able to handle it? I don't do anything formal on a regular basis, so it's more of that as-needed thing. I'm a huge proponent of magazines in the classrooms. I know a lot of the teachers were saying, no, you know, when we have Free Read Friday, I only want them bringing in a book. And I said, well, guess what? There's text in magazines, and you need to allow that as well. So Scholastic has a high school level magazine called Up Front. They actually have several magazines, but I like Up Front the best. It does current events. It's a good reading level for the kids. Most of the articles are short, so they can handle them. And so I've really encouraged, and I've gotten a few teachers to turn around and allow the magazines into the classroom. Even things like comic books can be hugely beneficial. If you're getting the student to read, that's the most important thing. If you sit them in front of a novel, they're going to fake read during Free Read Friday, regardless of what you make them do at the end. You know, you make them write a paragraph about what they read that day, they're not going to be engaged. They're not going to put as much effort into it. And then the only time they're picking up that book is in your 40-minute class on Friday when you force them to. So if you give them exposure to the magazines, to the comic books, to the graphic novels, they're going to start finding different things that they like. One of my elementary rules was the rule of 5. If you are reading a page or two and you come across 5 words or 5 errors that stop you dead and you cannot continue, that book is probably too hard for you and you should put it back and try another one. So I've shared that with the teachers, I've shared it with the students, And it's a nice, quick way to say, okay, I started this book, I'm really struggling with it, and let me put it back and try a different one. So that's kind of an informal way of figuring out your own reading level that at least gives them a jump start when I'm not around. So.
Part of my role is to develop and maintain a book room and to help the teachers develop an extensive classroom library. And so independent reading is very important as part of our literacy program. And so we work very hard at matching them up with books they can read and they enjoy. We do that by conferencing with them all the time and touching base with them all the time. As far as the content area, and so I'm always looking for books related in the book room to something in the content. Content area, for our intermediate, when they did textbook purchases, a lot of the companies had several, like social studies had several levels of the same, content, so that you could, the books on the outside all look the same. So a lot of the textbook companies are developing that for content areas.
And again, if you are trying to determine the level of a text, every text isn't available on Lexile.com, but the majority of them are, including textbooks. So you just go to www.lexile.com, and then there's a place where it says enter author, title, etc. So you just type in the title of the book and it will pull up the Lexile for you. So you'll automatically know what the Lexile level is for the textbook or the trade book or whatever it is that you're using. Just FYI.
And if the book you're looking for isn't on there, you can compare it to another book that you're familiar with and at least get a range close enough to what you're looking for. So.
And again, for those of you who may not know, Lexile is a form of a readability level. There are lots of them. There's a Fry readability, there's Flesch-Kincaid readability. Some books are leveled by Fountas and Pinnell, there's DRA, etc. And Lexile is the one that is actively being used for the Common Core standards.
There is also a site, it's called, I should have brought that with me, where it's a spreadsheet of all of the grading systems for a book. Fontaines, Fleisch, Lexile, DRA2. So if you know that this is a DRA2 book, then this should be Lexile, or this should be grade level, and that's all online also. So Lexile.
It's a comparative chart. So if you know one, you can get the rest. Okay, so what can content area teachers do to encourage literacy development in their classroom?
Well, Free Read Friday has been a huge success in the English department. It gives the students, some teachers do it every Friday. The kids walk in and they know that they're allowed to sit down for the whole class period and read. Other teachers do it every other Friday, others do it, we've just coined the term Free Read Friday. I think it came from Kelly Gallagher, but they'll use it any day of the week. Oh, okay, we need a break on Wednesday, so we're going to have Free Read Friday on Wednesday. But it is a great way to encourage the kids to read because they know they're not having to take notes, they're not having to listen to a lecture. They get to pull out a book and read, or a magazine if I've, encouraged the teachers to use the magazines and stuff. I've actually had some of the science and social studies teachers say that they've tried it. Everybody gets so concerned about covering their content, but giving the kids that mental break really helps them jump back in the next day and say, okay, I'm ready to take notes on ancient Greece now because, I had that downtime to relax and stuff. And it's even better if you can create a writing prompt that goes along, the story you chose, how would that be different if you lived in ancient Greece, So that's a fun way of comparing the content with the book that they chose to read, or the magazine or the newspaper. So some of the kids get very clever in their responses and others are like, well, I don't know, but at least it got them thinking a little bit and they're forced to write some sort of response at the end of that class period. So.
I think for content area teachers, Kelly Gallagher wrote one of his more recent books. He talked about the Wizard of Oz would be a terrible teacher
because and he related it to what he did. And I know that I did it all the time. I worked very, very hard at preparing to teach my kids, but I didn't let them see any of the work that I was doing. So they thought I had this special gene that I could understand Shakespeare, you know. And so he says,
hidden meaning.
yes,
Yes.
So he said, you know, the Wizard of Oz, you know, was behind a curtain, and all of the work that he was doing, and he intimidated people, and he came off as being the expert. So he says, come out from behind the curtain. And I think for the content area people, that's basically what you'd want to do. You want for literacy in your discipline to be basically the way we operate in this room. So you use that language, you expose them to it all the time. They can't do it because they don't have a vision for what it's going to be. And I think the mistake I made very often when I was younger was that I moved much too quickly in the gradual release of responsibility. I can't demonstrate it to them once and think they're going to be able to do it. You know, I needed to do it in front of them over and over and over, and that gradual release needs to be really gradual. And maybe also think of it as little bits. I'm doing it all the time, and what I'm asking them to do maybe is a little bit, and then a little bit, and a little bit, as we build towards their being able to independently do the whole thing.
We've tried to get magazines from different people, from community members, to put in each of the classrooms for freebies if there's a substitute, or it's only a half day, we've only got 15-minute classes. In the science rooms, there's Scientific American and things like that. I don't know what's in the other rooms. But that's how they've encouraged more literacy. I know I was working with science teachers, and they try to have the kids go and pick a magazine and then do a report on one article in a magazine. It could be any magazine they chose. It could be Planetary News, but it had to relate to science. And so that's how they're trying to get more literacy in the science. I forgot what magazine they were using for. I think the Smithsonian or social studies. I don't know.
Time magazine is a good one in the classroom. It usually has nice articles that engage the kids and get them interested. And another thing is that it often will get them interested in a topic, and they'll start asking me more questions, and I'll say, well, I don't know. Now we have to go find out. And they're excited to do that. They want the library pass to go check it out and research it and stuff. So it really helps. Yeah.
And that leads so nicely into the next question. It says, if you find it, what efforts can be made as a school community to encourage a more literate culture?
Well, I think having that collaboration time so that teachers realize that they're not by themselves when they're trying to figure out how do I get my kid to read more in the classroom. And I think getting magazines from the community is a great way to, you know, build on the resources that are available to you and bring it into the school.
I think using a common language, I think that maybe we need to build some small pieces again into our curriculum maps, because I looped up with my kids before, or I've had kids in more than one situation, and every year they come in and you say, well, do you know how to do this? No, don't know how to do it. Well, you start doing it and they're like, oh yeah. Well, if okay, they're taught, let's say transition words, you know, they're taught transition words in 6th grade. And we have it on a chart, and it's in every single room. And I think some of that consistency with language helps them make that transference. And so even the content area teachers can say that's a requirement. And I'm just using transition words as an example. But when you write, that's a requirement. I know you learned that in 5th, I know you learned it in 6th, I know you learned it in 7th, you know. I think sometimes reducing down into those small things would make us more efficient in it, and make it the community of us be more successful at doing it.
I know in my building we started having book chats. Well, first the district forced us to do a book chat. I don't remember what it was called, Move My Cheese or something. That's how long ago it was.
I've done that book
Okay. And it actually spun out into other little chats, and for a while they were tied into somebody's APR, and now they've just continued where there's, and most of them are around topics of autism or things like that, but they're community groups of teachers, and somebody will put, okay, we're going to do a book chat on the speed of dark, we're going to meet these 3 days, you know, read these chapters, and we'll meet this day, and it's actually brought a wider variety of teachers together, the art teacher, the science teacher, the special ed teacher, to have book chats. And I think we've become more of a literate community. Right now we're doing The Leader in Me is one of the books we're doing a book chat on, and I forgot the other one. It actually started with Tompkins County Book Reads. I don't know what the book is this year. I don't know if your districts get it. But Tompkins County and Tompkins County Library always picks a book for Cornell students to read. And then the community can read that book, and our district gets 3 books in June to read for September. And Cornell or Ithaca College or Cortland does it also. And whatever speaker they bring in, the committee will come list the speaker. That's how it started originally. Great idea.
Okay, now you were speaking about this a little bit earlier. If you are working with a content area teacher, and the two of you are actually co-teaching officially, then what would you expect each of your roles to be?
When I co-taught, it was up to the content area teacher to come up with the curriculum, and she would do all of whatever she needed to do, and then she would get it to me, and I would differentiate it for my special ed students. She and I would decide together, okay, they're going to answer these 5 questions. If it's said on their IEP, they don't have to do half the assignment. Which is the most important 5 questions you want the student to know? And so I would just differentiate the assignments and the readings and things like that.
And I have to talk about the past because I don't have the opportunity to co-teach now. But when I did, the classroom teacher and I would get together, we'd talk about what lesson we were going to do, what goals we wanted to accomplish with the students, and we would either set up either whole group lesson or stations so that if we did whole group, one of us would start, the other one would jump in, we'd switch back and forth. Like you were saying earlier, you didn't know where it was coming from because you were just circulating the room and both of us were teaching. If we did stations, we'd kind of be, okay, I'm going to be the expert at stations 1, 2, and 3, you take 4, 5, and 6, and rotate the kids through it that way and stuff. I think those are the most ideal ways to co-teach is when you can meet together, plan together, know what you're going to present, and then share the responsibility of all the kids. It's certainly the best way. I have co-taught with some teachers that said, okay, you take those 5 kids and teach them this, and I'll take the other 20 and teach them the same thing. And it's, not quite the definition of co-teaching, but, you work slowly and surely and get all 25 of those kids eventually together, so.
Work within the context within which you find yourself, right?
I really don't have much different to add to that, and it does tend, if you're doing reading groups, they want you to take the lowest kid, but you have the most expertise in it. But, sometimes it can evolve, you can change in and out and do different contexts, and it's not much different than what you already said.
All right, so are there any specific techniques or strategies that you find particularly helpful in working with the content area teachers, such as science teachers, social studies teachers, or math teachers? So do you find that there are specific strategies that work better with science, and then some that work better with math, etc.?
Again, mine is only elementary, so I'll defer to you guys.
I mostly work with social studies. I've done some science, but I mostly work with social studies outside of the English curriculum. And a lot of my focus is helping the kids identify the vocabulary and the writing. The writing is huge in social studies. They have to do those DBQs, the document-based questions. So we're working on pulling that evidence from the text, which again aligns so well. We were doing this years ago, and it aligns so well with the Common Core. So having those strategies available, I'm not highlighting the entire paragraph. What really is important here? What do I want to underline? What do I want to pull out? Why am I going to pull that out? How is that helping me? So talking it through with the kids, what you're thinking and why you're pulling that evidence out of the text. Science, again, I'll do that too. I'll pull the evidence from the text. But I don't do a whole lot of science, so I can't say that I help too much with that.
Yeah, pretty much same thing. If the kids know, we have common knowledge. If you're explaining a math problem, you have to use the same terminology that the math teacher is using, or you confuse them completely. But yeah, having the same common language and having the kids know the vocabulary. They have no idea, the lower level struggling kids, what photosynthesis means. They couldn't even pick it off a piece of paper. So you really have to work with them on vocabulary. And that's mainly what I do, vocabulary.
And you were talking about writing, Erin. So what support have you provided to various content area writing projects? That had your name on it.
It did, yeah. I work with the writing in the global studies and in the English, and I don't know. We created some assessments this summer, so I was part of the team that created the quarterly writing assessments. So I had my share in helping with that, making sure that it was going to be open-ended so that the struggling students could handle it the same way that the advanced students could handle it. I think that, again, on an as-needed basis, I help the teachers if they have a research project coming up, if they have a unit test that's going to have a large writing component to it, they'll kind of talk to me and say, okay, this is what I need the kids to do. What skills do I need to help them with? Can you also supplement in your class to make sure that they're ready for it and stuff? So, I don't know. I make sure my students know how to write paragraphs. I make sure they know how to do that introduction and that conclusion so that the reader knows that they've started and they know that they've finished. And then you work on pulling the evidence. Because their content area teacher is going to work on the content with them. They're going to work on the evidence with them. So I'm going to help them structure it so that if they do know what they're talking about, it comes out coherently on paper instead of them being able to talk about it and not be able to put it on paper. So a lot of my students really need that help on how am I going to write it down. I can tell you, Mrs. Brown, I can tell you the whole thing. So now I need to help them transfer it onto paper. So they have a writing journal in my class. Every student gets a notebook the first day of school, and they have to write for me every single day. And sometimes the writing is very specific. I will give them a prompt. It can relate to the content. Other times it's free write, and they can write about their weekend. They can write about their family. They can write about their favorite vacation spot. It doesn't matter. They are writing for me every single day. So.
The writing that I support is pretty much just to do the structure of the essays, GBQ, whatever. I don't do content. They bring me bullets, and we have to figure out how to put the bullets into complete sentences.
I don't work for the continuing teachers.
All right, so how would you suggest that literacy specialists work to forge positive relationships with teachers, parents, and other stakeholders?
Well, we have our open house coming up in a couple of weeks, and I always have, friendly signs in the classroom, right from day one, welcome. I help the parents know that all of the students in the classroom are going to get extra help and extra support. It isn't wonderful that your child's getting some extra attention. As a parent myself, I can usually relate to them in what they're doing. They're struggling with their high schooler who isn't doing their homework anymore, or they're struggling with, getting their kid to get on the bus to get to school and things like that. And I can relate to that, and I can, kind of make that connection with them. Like, I know exactly what you're coming from. I fought with my daughter just last night. So It helps when you make school less scary and you're able to relate with them and find some commonality. And our district, the coaches of all the sports teams and all the extracurriculars, the mock trial, all the different clubs and stuff, they send us out a roster so we know who to contact if we have a student, and we can say, oh, hey, I called your soccer coach the other day and we're talking about how you're on the field and you're doing so well, so now the first 15 minutes of practice you're actually going to pull out your English book and you're going to read before you get on the field and run, because we've had that conversation. So most of the coaches are right on board with that, and it's a nice short strategy. You're not taking away their practice, you're not taking away their game time, but you are getting 15 minutes, you're going to read, and then you're going to join the team with the practice or the club, the mock trial. Okay, well, that's great. You want to go to the next trial, you need to make sure that your English homework is done. So just building that connection, making sure all you have to do is say that you know the coach's name, and all of a sudden you don't even have to call them up, and all of a sudden the kids are like, oh wait, you know the coach?
I'm not sure if I quite remember the question, but I think it's about talking to parents, right?
Yeah.
But how do you forge the relationships with teachers, with parents, with administrators?
Because I think it really comes down to your belief system. If you really believe that all kids can learn, if you really believe that they all are valuable, if you really believe that we all have things that we're good at and things that we're not good at, and there's not just one that makes us good and makes us bad, I think you reveal yourself all the time. And when you believe it, it comes across. And when the kids know you believe it, it comes across. And then you don't have problems.
I try to make sure that our open house is also in 2 weeks. I try to make sure that I know something personal about the students. So when the parents come into the open house, I can say, I went and saw the game last, I stayed late to watch the soccer game, or I went to the volleyball match, or I hear you got a new puppy, or I try to make sure I can make that connection. And I also send home an introductory letter that tells the parents who I am and what I'm expecting from their students in my class, and what I will be doing to help their students in their content area classes as well as the reading classes.
When I send home my syllabus and expectations, I have my email on there and the school phone number so they can reach me that way. And you're right, it does help introducing yourself on paper before they come to the open house, because you've had their student or their child now for a month before they get to see you. So
I think you need to make sure the kids know you. Like all my students know that I'm a grandma now. That's all they talk about is my grandma.
exactly. Yeah.
Make yourself real to them.
Yeah.
Show them that you care. They believe you when you do.
Yeah.
Now, what about the teachers? What if you are going to be working with a teacher who is a little more resistant, to having, this is perhaps a veteran teacher who is a little more resistant to having you in there judging? That's a perception sometimes, judging them and what they're doing. How do you forge positive relationships with them?
First, to start off by saying something positive about their teaching, about their classroom, things you've heard from other students about them. I know the kids love coming to your class. This is so exciting, And I'm not saying to make it up. I mean, just find something positive that you can start with. And then kind of work your way in and say, I was wondering, do you need any help with your struggling writers? I'd love to offer you some ideas if you ever wanted to sit down at lunch and we can chat about how to get the writers and readers to work a little bit harder for you. So giving them that compliments kind of sets the stage. I do that with the parents and the kids too. Starting off on a positive note. Nothing false. You definitely want to be honest with them, but starting with the positive, Instead of saying, hey, you're a struggling reader and that's why you're in my class, I always start by saying, I'm so excited to have the opportunity to get to work with you, So I'm so excited to have the opportunity to work with a veteran teacher. I'm going to learn from you, and I hope I can share some ideas with you as well. So
And I agree with that, and I also think, follow their lead for a while, and maybe have a little discussion before you start on defining roles, what would you like me to do, what do you want to do, and then you make small changes but you have to start with a relationship, and respecting them. That's the same with the kids, it comes down to respect, and giving a little time to develop, and maybe define roles.
It really helps if you get in good with one of the veteran teachers who's kind of the unofficial leader of the group, because then they'll be saying, it worked for me. When I came up to the high school, I didn't seek her out, but I happened to help her out right away, and all of a sudden I was like, you helped so-and-so, I need you to come help me. Okay. So it really, they become your little private cheerleader, and that really helps, get those relationships going quicker. So.
Yeah, when you offer, it really helps. Yeah.
Or if you find something that they do well, your students have brought you something and said, oh, we did this in biology, and we did this, and we did this. And then you go to the teacher and say, how did you get them to want to do that? Ask them questions and how to do it, and then they'll start coming back to you. But the students will do the same thing to them. Well, just told me this.
Now we're moving into the current state of the lack of secondary literacy specialists in general. So what is your opinion on the lack of literacy specialists at the secondary level, and how do you account for that?
I think it's a shame that they've cut back on the literacy specialists. And I think the school recognizes it too. Ideally, they'd have a literacy specialist at every grade level or in every content area. Ideally, they'd have us co-teaching with the content area teachers. I think that, how do I account for it, is I think budget cuts. Usually the first places to go are the ones that are not, they're not state mandated. Even though AIS is state mandated, there's ways to broaden it so much. We don't have a restriction on how many students we can have. So they can just keep giving me more, giving me more, and giving me more. And, their effectiveness is going to change. When I'm working with a group of 5 is different than when I'm working with a group of 25. So the effectiveness changes, but the district has to make cuts somewhere, and unfortunately that's kind of where they head first. I don't think literacy specialists are going to ever disappear, but I think it is a challenge for the districts to fight for them and to keep as many in there as they really should have. So.
I don't have much to add. Our district, I think it was 3 years ago, made really deep cuts. And I've seen some of it come back. Slowly, people have, some jobs have come back. We're not back to where we were, and everybody has to do more with less.
Yeah, again, this comes down to budget cuts. But I think in my district, there are a lot of students coming in, struggling readers, and there's more and more, and the scores for the ELA tests, 3 to 8, are low. So this is one way that they can focus their attention in trying to raise those scores, make the district look good, and educate the kids. So I think that it's going to start coming up, especially with the new STAR scores coming up in the park assessments, if they ever come out. Who knows?
Do you think that a program like RTI will become state mandated for the upper grade? Aaron and I were talking about this a little bit earlier.
I think the interpretation of RTI right now varies from district to district. I think it varies within the district. When I was part of the RTI program at the elementary level, it was more hands-on with me. As soon as they were identified as needing support, they would immediately get put into my classroom or immediately get put on my roster. Now at the high school level, the RTI is to focus on fewer kids and be more specific and more direct with them. So the elementary level, we have like 30 kids in RTI. At the high school level, we have like 5 per grade level. So it's very specific, it's very targeted. We are meeting with the kids, we're meeting with the parents, we're meeting with the teachers on a regular basis throughout the year. We have very specific targeted goals for them. Not to say that didn't exist at the elementary level, but I think we were too broad there. And at the high school level, we've gotten very strict. And certainly there are more than 5 students in 9th grade that need it, but we've just taken these 5 and we're running with them. And once they're in the program, we touch base with them through all 4 years. So those that start as freshmen are continued to be monitored through their senior year. And the goal, obviously, is to get those seniors to graduate. So each level that you identify them with, we continue with them, and to have that small focused group really helps. But I don't know. I don't know how it's going to be mandated, because I think right now it's just so broad for interpretation. But I think it's coming down the pike. I think it's definitely coming along.
So this person's question, of course, was tied into the opportunities for secondary literacy specialists. If it were state mandated, do you see that there would be more secondary literacy specialists to address that?
If it's state mandated with the numbers, like I said, we have 5. I can handle those 5, you know. So in addition to my caseload, having those extra 5 added on isn't going to make or break it. If it becomes state mandated that you have to take the bottom 20% or something, certainly I would think that that would definitely have a push to get more literacy specialists. And I would love to see that, because, like I said, it's tough. I mean, you're the only one in your building. I'm one of 2. So, I mean, it's difficult having to kind of do the job by yourself. So.
And I think Barb, you'll like this question. What reading programs are best, do you think, for middle school?
Well,
It's hard, I know. to
Well,
tell
we
you.
don't use a program. We use Fountains of Talent. So we use